Yes, we are back again. Pop culture portraits. This time we're doing Dave Chappelle. Specifically, this is his, I guess it's the Charlie Murphy True Hollywood Story, or Charlie Murphy Stories bit on the Dave Chappell Show from back in the, I guess that's the early 2000s or the mid 2000s at this point. Yeah, kids, that show is probably not for you. No, I'm going to say it's definitely not for you for the younger kids. Well, it depends on, I guess, how progressive your parents are. I know my my upbringing, we were a little more wide open to what we were exposed to. But anyways, so it's Black History Month, and I am, like so many others, honoring Black excellence in the field of culture. For me, I chose to focus on pop culture. Trust me, there are plenty of really informative, educational profiles of really great people in history. I choose to focus on the great people in our sort of entertainment history. And so there's nobody more significant in this current era of comedy than Dave Chappelle, in my opinion. And what it does go to show is how prevalent, excellence in Black culture is, and how powerful it is to see people of a different color in such reverence. I think there's a huge impact on society at large when you do. And so, of course, me being an artist, how I reflect that is I like to draw. And in this case, I'm drawing Dave. This is actually an older piece. I did this. This wasn't in the time of when the show was airing, because I don't even think the iPad was out then. If it were, it was pretty new, and I certainly didn't have Procreate. Which, by the way, this drawing is being done in Procreate on my iPad, my new iPad Pro. And as a matter of fact, this drawing was probably done in the old iPad Pro, now that I think about it. But certainly not in 2004 or whenever this bit was aired on the Chappelle Show. Speaking more about Dave Chappelle himself, yes, trust me, he's underneath all that, all that makeup and hair and an outfit. He's basically playing Rick James, as told by Charlie Murphy, and they did this incredibly funny bit. You can catch it on, I think the Chappelle Show is back on Netflix. I know it was off for a little while, now it's back, so you certainly can catch it there. Again, I wouldn't recommend it for the kids, but hilarious even to this day. And this Charlie Murphy bit is basically him telling stories about, Charlie Murphy's obviously Eddie Murphy's brother. And so they would go to parties or they go to clubs, and he would have interactions with, famous people of that era, probably in the 80s. And so he tells this hilarious story of him interacting with Rick James, famous sort of R&B, funk, pop star. I think he was signed to Motown. And he had some huge hits in the 80s. And just like that back then, it was drug fueled, a lot of ego. And the way Charlie Murphy tells it's hilarious. And the way Dave Chappelle plays Rick James is hilarious. And there's some famous lines from that bit that I will not share on this video. But the whole point is, and the whole point of me sharing all these sort of pop culture Black icons this month, Black History Month, is to sort of highlight inspiration, or to highlight, let's face it, if, in my opinion, again, this is just me talking, just a humble artist doing these little how to sketch videos. It highlights, like, if you have someone who is of a high level, and let's face it, there's no higher level in comedy than Dave Chappelle. I think it serves to show that you can be inspired no matter what background you're from. You can be inspired by someone who doesn't necessarily look like you. I think that, to me, that's the whole point of it. And then if you stop and think about the history of comedy in general, some of the most impactful people in comedy have been Black people. As a matter of fact, one of the earlier, I didn't do a video on it, but one of the earlier sketches I did in this sort of pop culture icon series was of Richard Pryor, who, if you ask Dave Chappelle, if you ask Joe Rogan, if you ask Sarah, Silverman, if you ask Jerry Seinfeld, whoever, Richard Pryor would be sort of like their touchstone, their greatest comic of all time. And I imagine for a lot of young comics now, or old comics now, Dave Chappelle is probably considered one of the greatest of all time. And again, I think that's super impactful in terms of pushing culture past sort of a lot of the racial angst that we go through and the racial strife that we go through. If you stop and think about that, you can sit and you can laugh at someone who does not look like you, didn't come from the same background, social, economic, or otherwise, who maybe does a different form of art than you're accustomed to. If you can stop and sort of embrace that, I think that it'll go a long way towards us sort of bridging the gaps that we have. Fact is, even in the art field, there's sort of a tribalness to it. And for me, Dave Chappelle represents someone who sort of breaks through the tribal bonds. Actually, I say tribal, like, encumbrances or tribal bondages, bondage that happens when you get sort of like in your own bubble and you only want to sort of absorb culture from your own bubble. And Dave breaks that because he makes everybody laugh. And I feel the same way about art. Stylistically, like me personally, I have this sort of, over the years I've developed this sort of cartoony style, a lot of like bold lines. You can see I'm trying to emphasize that here in the piece. Hopefully, me rambling on is not not distracting from the artwork that's developing. By the way, I'm presenting this in time lapse. I'd like for you guys in the comments to leave sort of an impromptu poll. Which do you prefer of the videos that I do? The ones that are like these sort of commentaries over the time lapse, or do you prefer to actually see me rendering? You can see my hand actually rendering things live. Well, it's not live; it's recorded and then put out, and then you watch it live. But which do you prefer, or is it a combination of? So leave a comment below and just kind of let me know like what you guys think and what you guys feel in terms of what you want to see on these videos. Because let's face it, I can just draw all day, but the fact that I'm sharing it with you, I want to make sure it's something that is equally entertaining and enlightening. Speaking of enlightenment, let me get back to the point I'm trying to make about Dave Chappelle and about art and how, like, again, you can be inspired by people who are different. And I think that's the best thing and the way, perhaps the sole way of us really truly uniting. And I know it's going to sound corny and it's going to be like, what does this dude know? Again, just a guy who draws pictures for a living. But what I have experienced and known, being fortunate enough to have traveled the world and, with my art, is that when you meet new people of different cultures, it's less relevant of, how you look and more relevant of what you have to offer. And, what Dave has shown is like, if you have immense talent and a point of view and you're interested and you're, you don't have to be, a legendary world-class comic to have impact on people. However, you do have to have some sort of like ability to absorb the world around you and to reflect that back onto people in a way that is not overly offensive. Which brings me to another point about Dave Chappelle. A lot of people are offended by his comedy. And there are a lot of people who, over the years, have been sort of like, they bristle at, some of the language, particularly in the older Chappelle shows. Again, this was the early to mid 2000s. We weren't as woke, and we certainly weren't as sensitive to other people's feelings culturally. Obviously there's a lot of language in that series, that Comedy Central series, the Dave Chappell Show, that is, highly offensive by today's standards. And I wonder if we lose a little something by sort of trying to cancel that. I guess that's probably a longer conversation for a longer video. Maybe I'll pick a different subject to kind of get into cancel culture and how it relates to how it serves to diminish art, because we don't necessarily know the intent of the artist. And if the intent of the artist is to be entertaining, not to be offensive, I get, in my opinion, we have to kind of gauge how quickly we want to cancel them from society. But anyways, I digress. So, as I mentioned before, This is Procreate on the iPad. You can see here, let me mention a little bit about the art that I'm doing. It's, you know, if you've seen any of my previous videos, I take a photograph, I Photoshop it, I manipulate it. And in this case, I just kind of cropped in and focused on this sort of section. That's why you don't see the top of his head or the rest of his body. And it's literally, I take the photograph, I diminish it on a layer, take another layer on top, and I do this really stark, bold line art. And then in the end here, I always kind of like to just determine whether I want to put it on a darker background or a lighter background to create contrast. And so that's what Dave Chappell definitely submits to the world and delivers to the world is contrast, you know. So anyways, this is my Dave Chappell piece. Dave Chappell as Rick James, as told by Charlie Murphy in the Dave Chappell Show. Definite pop culture icon, definitely relevant in sort of Black History Month to sort of celebrate him and his comedy and his career. But anyway, so that's Dave Chappell. Hope you guys do enjoy these videos. Of course, you got to subscribe to the channel. And if you do, click the like button, hit subscribe, hit the bell icon, because that will allow you to get more videos like this and many others. So, sketchy go ichie. Live your moment. Happy sketching, y'all. Peace.